Hey, how you doing, YouTube? I'm here in Yountville, California at the Veterans Home. I'm on location. I'm just outside of the gates of the Veterans Home because I guess they don't allow you to film inside, which I have no quarrel with. I'm just here on location to touch on the subject of PTSD and the importance of not turning a blind eye to some of the people that go out there and ask for help, and how that's relevant to everything that I'm expressing here on my channel on the permission statement. I'm Johnny X-Ray. I declare under penalty of perjury what I say here is true, and I thank y'all who have been coming back or who are riding with me along this journey. And if you're new here, I appreciate you for even giving me a chance to bend your ear for a minute. So without getting too much further into that, so what transpired here, unfortunately, is a sad moment in time, both in Napa history and the veterans alumni history and treatment, post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental afflictions that come with service. Some people have afflictions and addictions before they go into service from past trauma from their childhood, their life. They may be going through a divorce, and then sometimes that gets stacked up on top of whatever they may have endured during deployment. But that's not always the case. Not all, you know, veteran suicides are tethered to a deployment from what the research comes out. But what happened here was there was a soldier, a veteran, who had came here and was going through some kind of PTSD program, and he was getting treatment. And from how it was explained to me before, when I spoke to some of the security people the last time I was here and did a video, was that the way he behaved or the way he came across didn't really work so well with the people that were running that program, the ones that were doing the treatment for veterans with PTSD here at the Veterans Home in Yountville. And however many times something may have gone wrong or whatever was said between these individuals, they removed this veteran from that program, and that didn't go over so well with him. Now, this individual may have done many great things in life. He could have saved human lives. He could have saved 20 kittens from a tree. But at this point, it matters for nothing. It doesn't, nothing that he may have done good in his life, or whether he was a victim of something as a child or otherwise, none of that matters now. I'm not going to say his name. I don't have it committed to memory, but it's all wiped out for nothing at this point, because what he did here, it devastates anything he may have done selflessly or otherwise in his life, because he came back with a high-powered rifle, and he killed 3 women here that worked at that PTSD treatment center here at the grounds in Yountville. One was a pregnant woman, and he shot them all in their forehead. And I don't want to just like touch on the brutality of it to add anything to it, but we need to express the severity of how abhorrent it would be for somebody to go to that level to come in and execute these 3 women, one of them being a pregnant woman. Doesn't matter, but I mean, whether it's a pregnant woman or not, what matters is he took 3 human lives, male or female, old or young, doesn't matter, but just that does add emphasis to it when you think about the vulnerability of these 3 young women that were trapped, and this horrible outcome of what this man did. Whatever he did previous to that, it's all gone. That's now his unfortunate legacy, and at times I think they want to just kind of brush over that. But there's people that have horrible stuff done to them in life, and they can go through life suffering or having suffered horrible things to them and never commit an act of murder. But then there's also people who don't go through this stuff, and yet they'll take human life just like that. And those are the kind of people that I'm up against for the most part. And unfortunately, the people in this matter that are taking up action against me and trying to utilize my service, having deployed to go save other people who were being harmed, and trying to tap into that and use that as a weapon against me, and to try to weaponize that to try to cause distance between my son and I. It's bizarre, but it's relevant in these legal proceedings, especially considering what they did in that ex parte hearing, what they attempted to do, and who got involved. I don't murder nobody. I ain't never murdered nobody, despite all the stuff that I've been through. That's why I posted that video earlier of where at 12 years old I was faced with a decision. Do I take human life, or do I go suffer and run away and live on the streets? And that's what I chose to do. And that decision actually catapulted me into even more violence. I had to go into juvenile hall in Napa. Then I had to go to a more aggressive juvenile hall in San Diego, where it's a whole different ball game. Then you go into treatment programs, foster care. Then you go to California Youth Authority, where it's an exceptionally predatory environment, where then you're hardwired to crack people's skulls open for next to nothing, because you're not allowed to be like, that doesn't matter. If you do that, everybody's watching. You're in a whole world of hurt right there. And a lot of these people, like I said, are putting these videos out to explain exactly what they mean when they say gladiator school. So that created more hardship in my life and caused more. I sacrificed a lot down the road because of that, because I was more than willing to hit the wood line. Even in Germany, if people who went to Fort Benning, Georgia with me will tell you, I don't mess around, man. It's like when it comes to the ones and twos, it's just like, hey, we can negotiate and talk and be respectful and kind, and I have no problem with that. But once it gets to a certain point where it's like, okay, well, there's nothing left to be said, or if it goes directly to that point, which in some cases it will, because some people will start off where they're just going to impose their will at you, but like, okay, well, let's hit the wood line, let's get it done, and then we can have that discussion. Win or lose, I don't mind losing if that's a necessity, but sometimes that's what it has to start out with, depending on how they come into the I guess the negotiation, whatever it is, the subject matter that you're trying to facilitate an end result. But having gone to gladiator school, in a way, more than likely saved me from going and committing the very horrible act that this person does and that other people do that are involved in these circumstances, because most of them are cowards. I mean, there's a lot of people that kill people that are not cowards at all. They're willing to lose their life. They're willing to take a life. They're on a different level. But then there's some people who take human life because they're scared. They're scary little bitches. I don't want to cuss too much because I worry that it might take away from the sincerity of my message. So they're little scary, coward little people, and they feel that they have to grab a weapon or they can't lose, and so they grab a weapon and they do harm that puts themselves in a more severe circumstance, right? Because if they just would have went and just got them up on the ones and twos, whether they win or lose, if they could accept the loss, or if they weren't afraid to lose, to take some bruises and some scratches. And that's not to say you can't lose your life in a hand-to-hand combat scenario. We're going to go through some of those, and I'm going to explain to y'all. I know my friend I told you about, Steve, was hit with the bottle. That's not bare hand combat. But I have some people that died in bare hand combat. Some people who weren't even warriors or nothing like that at all. They got sucker punched. So we'll go into that. But for the most part, when you go into like a scuffle, see, even to this day, I'll put on gloves, headgear, whatever we got to do to just figure it out with everybody's coming out okay. We can reach an understanding, we can have a disagreement, we can have a discussion, we can get them up on the ones and twos, whatever we got to do. But everybody lives through the whole thing. But when you take human life, there's no undoing that. There's no going back. But I've seen more times than not that some people will immediately grab a weapon, or they're willing to take a human life out of fear. So I guess having to go through all that younger trauma in gladiator school gave me that confidence and that courage. And that actually built more later on when I met the Riveras, and they taught me what it is to make sure that you're known for, whether there's 3 people you're against and it's just you, whether it's 2 of you or 3 of you against 10 of them or whatever, or it's just you and one individual, make sure that your legacy isn't about pulling a weapon or anything. It's about saying, hey, let's figure this out that way. And I know some people would say that's ultra violent, but the other stuff is the ultra violence, because you can have it a debate in that sense, or at least reach a mutual respect, and then still continue going on with it. But once somebody pulls a weapon out, that other person has to pull a weapon out, or they don't, it's a mess. So I was thinking about that on the way over here, is maybe going through all that trauma helped keep me from being like some of those cowardly people. Because I hate to say it, a lot of them are cowardly, man. They're just, if you pull out a gun and you shoot somebody who doesn't have a gun, or you pull out a knife and if both y'all have a knife and you're going at it, or both you have a gun, it may be excessive, it may be unnecessary, but at least you're going against somebody that's evenly matched. Same thing with a fight. When people jump people, one person, that's not cool, and that's where that person can then use lethal force to save their own life. But if it's a really big person fighting a little person, or somebody that's a better fighter and goes and picks on weak people, also a coward, because they're looking for stripes from people that they know they can beat up, like Christopher Werner Rader, the old dropout, SNY dropout. He likes to go out there and pick fights with people who he knows he can beat. And I have an assumption that he goes out and does a lot of stuff that he does because he's trying to overcome the mental obstacle that he dropped out, that he can't, he worked so hard to establish himself as a known person and respected and feared, and then he goes to prison where there's a whole bunch of other equally or greater knuckleheads that are about that life, and they rolled him off the yard into an SNY yard. And what I saw, the thinking there, the mental obstacles that I saw him trying and failing to go through when he came home, was to maintain his ideals of Christianity and his past of being whatever he elevated himself to. He couldn't let go of that, and unfortunately that kept putting him back in these circumstances that was putting him at risk of going right back to the same thing. It was like it was all for naught. And the victims in that circumstance would be his daughters, who didn't have their father there for almost 2 decades because of his decisions that he made, and yet he's back out here doing the same thing. And so I kept asking my spouse to hold him accountable, not for my own good, but for my own good, because I don't want to see anybody in our family suffer from seeing him hurt again, but for his own benefit. Like, you already put your mother and your sister and your daughters through all that, so I kept hoping that he would be like, snap out of it, and that wasn't the case. But seeing some of the things that he was doing along the way, it kind of gave me that impression that, again, this is a cowardly individual, because he doesn't go out there and fight with people that he knows will give him a solid resistance. And when people are like that, there's usually some kind of underlying mental, flaw. Let's call it a flaw. But in the circumstance that I'm faced here, both that individual, the people from Napa Empowering Women's Services, which, like I say, Napa Empowering Women's Services is a great agency. What they do is so important and so awesome. But some of the people there are tethered to the very kind of people that I speak of, that made justifications and excuses for taking human life. Not to protect their own, not to save their own, but to commit murder. And they give themselves over to these people. And I mean give themselves over. Control, physical, mental, the whole 9 yards. And so when I'm having these discussions and debates, and I hear certain things from them, it lets me know that this needs to be nowhere near. This individual and their chaotic life choices should be nowhere near my son, because he doesn't need that kind of influence in his life. He can grow up and he can be strong and he can be empowered. But unfortunately, these women tethered to this Napa Empowering Women's Services are utilizing their connections and their influence and their titles to try to press forward empowerment when it's not necessarily empowerment in certain circumstances. It's actually entitlement. And with the respondent in this matter, it's entitlement. They literally feel that they're entitled to drink and drive in Napa, or to get drunk in front of my son. Or her friend Helen, I've had the unfortunate experience of trying to sit down with her while she's smoking a cigarette, and she's giving me this whole spiel that I think she regurgitates to people as a defense mechanism about why she married this dude doing life in prison for murder. That, oh, he was a victim of circumstance and all that. No, he took somebody's life, man. It is what it is. You know. But then she starts calling black people mayates. As soon as she says that, I'm just like, you know, just I didn't want to hang out with him after that. I told my spouse, like, I want to hang around your racist friend. If you don't know what mayates means, that's a derogatory term for black people. So it really tripped me out that somebody who would give themselves over to a murderer doing life and couldn't see past the obvious how do you say appearance of that decision, that there's hundreds of millions of people elsewhere and the one person they have to choose is they pick somebody doing life in prison for murder. Maybe he'll get out, I don't know, it's not my place to call. I don't know. But then also to seek justification for what he did and everything, but then to assassinate an entire culture because she's married to one individual. And I was looking at her like, she doesn't know that my niece is black and that I serve with all these black folks that I call brothers and sisters, and I don't know, I don't subscribe to that stuff. So right when she said that, I just looked at her kind of like with disgust. So does that mean you as an advocate, when somebody comes in that's not Mexican or white, do they not get treated well? So if you're here in Napa and you go to Napa Empowering Women's Services, just be aware, look me in the eye. A person that's there that does the intake and all that, that person calls black people mayates. Look her in the face, ask her. And that's on the soul of my dead brother. I put that on. That, I mean, I'm not here to cast no dispersions on news as a whole, but when hearing that from somebody that's supposed to be an advocate, it just made me kind of just like, yeah, this person's got some issues that they got to work on. And I didn't want to bring my son around that and their alcoholism and the daughter. Now, I can't say that individual's an alcoholic, but the gangs in their family, the men in their family, the decisions that these women make to make bond and connection with gang members that would influence their children. How could an adult, honestly, for real, how could a male or female put forward a role model that's an active gang member for your child, man? Like, how does that flip it as if it was me, right? I'm in the middle of a divorce, and whoever I choose moving forward, I don't have a daughter, I have a son, but they're still role models either way, doesn't matter. But flip it this way, that let's pretend I'm a single father. Hey, and I'm talking to a friend. Hey, man, you know what? I just met this new lady. She's banging. What? Like, she's pretty? No, yeah, she's pretty too, but no, she's actually banging. She's from a gang. She's a gang member. Like, active? Yeah, she's from a neighborhood, from a barrio. Like, oh, okay, all right. Well, where she live? Oh, she lives on the other side of town. Like, well, who? Oh, she lives at home with her parents. Living at home with her parents, huh? All right. How old is she? Oh, like mid-30s, early 40s, whatever. It's like, she got a job? Well, yeah, And I'm not to say that some of these people that are part of their network don't have good jobs or whatever, but if you're still actively partaking in the destruction of your culture, like, oh, I love my own, but I hate my own at the same time, that says a lot right there. So, unfortunately, as a parent, would it be okay for me, as a father, now to go seek out a woman for selfish, like, oh man, she can suck the meat off a bone, but she's in the gang, she's doing this, grown adult, living at home with mom? Would that be a proper decision to put that as a female role model for my son, as a stepmom or whatever, just selfishly? Maybe she's cheating on me, slaps me on the butt when Maybe she's a biker girl and she puts me on the back of her Harley and her friends smack me on the ass when I walk by. I mean, it's like ridiculous. Or if I had a daughter, which I don't, I only have a son, but a female role model even to a son is important because it's going to show the father what kind of women that he chooses. So a mother would be the same thing. But if I did have a daughter and I picked this chaotic, active gang member female to be a role model to my daughter, what does that say about the individual? Those are selfish choices. And so it's not an assault on their empowerment when you address that issue, but it's a realistic and it's a reasonable question to be had, because if you look at the structures of a lot of these families and they try to push it behind, oh, this is cultural and you're attacking our culture. No, there's not. There's tons of people from the culture who don't actively get involved in gangs and murders and selling drugs and all that other stuff. That's a bunch of horse shit. But a lot of people will try to use that as a shield, just like they try to use the empowerment. I drive for all these wonderful women that are super empowered. They run the Pacific Northwest. They fly in, they're on some executive stuff, and they would never sit there and pick an active gang member as a mate or as an influence to their child, a role model. It's ridiculous. But sometimes they'll try to press that forward. And then if you look at, I hate to say it, here in Napa and other places, sometimes you'll see chaos within a family. A lot of the young men will then get into the gangs, they'll get into the trouble, they end up going to the prison, and the women are still picking those kind of dudes. And then you'll look across a family and you'll look at the ratio of men to women and how many of those men got involved in gangs and how many of them have went to prison. And a lot of it has to do with those chaotic, selfish choices that these female parents would put forward, they'll make, and then they'll try to claim it as empowerment, that if anybody says, hey, that's not cool, man, like that's not a good idea. And that goes with men and women. If some dude's just trying to say, oh, I'm a masculine whatever, and it's a good idea for me to pick some drugged out floozy who's out there sucking the meat off the bone, but cheating on them, actively in gangs, on drugs, if they're cleaned up and they got their life squared away, fair enough. If it's reasonable to expect that they'll get there, high risk, fair enough. But knowing that they're actively involved in whatever actions and putting that forward as a role model for your child, I mean, I can't be the only one that thinks that's not a good idea. And what I'm up against here is an army of people that are connected to the system, the family court system, the judiciary, family court, judicial part of it. Then you got Napa Empowering Women's Services, you got Family Court Services, which is part of the judiciary, and then you got Child Welfare Services. And they all seem to have a vested interest to allow the individual that's in this dissolution of marriage that should be an annulment. I got some more information. I'm going to show it to y'all. Now I have to file for an appeal. Well, at least I have to file to ask the commissioner to reconsider his decision before I file an appeal. I thought the time had passed, but we'll get further into that. But when a commissioner overturns what should have been kind of set in stone, and when you're forced into doing something that, man, y'all don't even have no idea what I've been going through with these people in this matter. And it's like I get pressed further and further and closer to just coming right out and saying it. But doing what I had to do to protect my son, and to see Child Welfare Services just kind of take a back seat and do what they have to do to protect their own image as an agency, and then to see Napa County do the same thing. They're just like, oh, liability, and we've been sending this individual out there to do these things, and this person could do wonderful things if they could just get past those obstacles and maybe stop allowing people that are from the past and from the present to make the same chaotic choices and thinking that's okay to bring that in the orbit of our child. And I'm not okay with that, and I won't be okay with that. So I'm one individual. I'm a kid that was hurt here in Napa County. Myself and other children were molested and tortured here in Napa County, and Child Welfare Services didn't do nothing. You know, at 9 years old, I hung myself from a branch, man. I got on top of the doghouse that we had in American Canyon on Elliott Drive. I knew what it was going to happen when I came home. I was just tired of it. Got gambling parents that would leave us with substandard babysitters, and as a result, we were harmed. And then we would get the fucking violence that was imposed on us. It was just enough. And so for a 9-year-old kid to have to make that decision, I failed, fortunately. And that was, again, child welfare was involved at that point. You know, they had already went to the school. They took all the pictures. They gave me back to the person, the people, the abuse continued. Then it ends up over there at the Kenwood Apartments for the video that I showed you all earlier. And it got to another, just more. It's like, you know, at what point were they ever going to do their job? And when was I going to have a hero to save me? You know, when was somebody going to fucking save me? You know what I mean? What, when I was hanging from a fucking branch again? So I had to make a choice to either blow this dude's brains through his fucking nose cavity, because I know where they kept the firearm, because I had to clean the room and all that stuff, or run away from home. Run away from home, end up out on the streets, get pressed into juvenile hall and placement programs, California Youth Authority, eventually to the Conservation Corps, the Job Corps, to the Army, with the friggin' amazing men from 22 Infantry. They showed me what brotherhood is. Shout out to Remo Cisco too, because there's a lot of brothers that I knew before the Army that, man, they had the same love, care, and camaraderie that the brothers in the Army have. But deploying with the U.S. Army in the 1st Infantry Division, 22 Infantry, to another country to protect human life. People that were being harmed and murdered and wanted to murder and harm people back as a result. And we're placed in the middle. We're sent. We're full body. We put it on. We put it on. We put the armor on. We take the weapon system and we go and we do our job. And we get in the middle and we're like, hey, we're here to protect both y'all. And you have to earn the trust of both sides, because one side's thinking you're there to help them get revenge, and the other side is like they thinking they can't trust you because they're thinking you're gonna let them. And so you have to show both sides that, hey, I'm here to protect you, to stop from what you were going through, but I can't let you harm these people. And I'm here to protect you. Despite what your people did to these people, we shall protect you too. We will do our job. We will be fair, impartial. You know what I mean? We're here for peace. And so that was an honor and a privilege. And to do it with these men here, these brothers that would go on to suffer so much. If you get a chance, check out the book Two Wars. That's Captain Nate Self. He was my platoon leader when I first got to Germany, 1st platoon. He was a lieutenant at that time. Coolest dude, man. Cool as a fan. But later on, he was in a helicopter that was shot down in Afghanistan when they were trying to go in and for QRF to save those Navy SEALs. And I think it was combat air controller for the Air Force, John Chapman, trying to go save those individuals. They got shot down, and he lost quite a few men. But he talks about the two wars. The two wars is, the first war is the war that he was sent to fight. The second war is trying to come home and find normalcy and find peace. And that's a war within itself. So it's a good description. And there's people out there that are fighting wars that didn't go to war, that maybe have been through some other stuff, you know, but are equally traumatic or traumatic within their own rights. And so you get a chance, check out Two Wars by Nate Self. Check out House to House by David Balavia. He's got another book, I think it's called Remember the Ramrods. Check those books out. Go on Amazon, check them out, read them. Go on YouTube. Just Google their names, David Balavia, or you Google Captain Nate Self, and check out their stories, man. It's friggin' crazy. But to have served with 22 Infantry in this lineage of men that would come later, or that we served with as we went to go establish peace and save human life, that would later on go to war and suffer losing our friends and our brothers. And when I told you all the story about what happened over there with my friends, that I finally had enough, and I did what the Army trained me to do. And The last day I saw my brother alive before he went to Afghanistan, he came from Corona. He had came from Colorado. He went to Corona. He came down to come see me at that house where I was standing guard over those people. And then he and I went and put in work. And that was the last day I saw my brother. That was the day that I made the commitment that I would tell his story. And we chose the name I Refuse to Lose. And we went and handled business together. And I was able to give my brother a hug and tell him that I loved him. And I told him that I had a really big concern about this mission. And I'll tell you more about that. He didn't have to go. There was something that happened. That whole thing that we were in Europe, just knocking people out. Unfortunately, sometimes it was over the top. But that mentality that myself and him and Omar had before we went to Germany, then we got to Germany, and it followed both of us. It followed Omar back to the States, actually to Colorado. It followed Michael, my brother, to Colorado, and he got in a spot of trouble, so he shouldn't have even deployed. But he was the platoon sergeant, and his men needed him. But had he been held back like he was supposed to because of what he did with that whole lack of impulse control thing that I tell you about, he shouldn't have deployed, and he would still be alive today. You can't change history, and he wanted to be there with his men. And so that's a hard one to process sometimes. But you know, yeah. When I think back to that, but the last day I saw him, he came down there, and he rode with me, and we went and we put in work. That's what brothers do. And if you type in Michael Cardenas, Cardenaz, I'm saying it like that so people who don't speak Spanish don't have a hard time spelling it out if I say Cardenas, but it's Michael David P. Cardenas. There's a video on YouTube, like I've told y'all, from the day that he landed. His body was brought from, it went from Afghanistan to Ramstein with brother Adrian. Adrian made the journey with him as he was with them on the day that he passed, and on the day that the Taliban came, I think 8 months before, and tried to take both of their lives. They stood strong. They stayed out in the open, the mortar pit, lobbing mortar rounds at the Taliban to get their men out of the kill box, taking direct and indirect fire. He was with Michael that day, and he was there the day that Michael lost his life, unfortunately. But he went to Germany, and then he stayed with them the whole time on the plane until he got to Riverside. It was at Riverside or Moreno Valley, that air base right there. And we were there on the ground. Me, Carrizosa, Narvaez, Omar. Omar wasn't an infantryman, he was a tanker, but he was Big Red One. Me and him and Michael went all over Europe and did our thing. And if you watch that video, you'll see us as we're leaving the base. It was the family, myself, that we had a police escort, my brother, his family, and you'll see like a teal green or aquamarine colored IROC Z with an American flag being held out on each side. One side's me, the other side's Omar. And Omar, when he found out, he was like, yo, when I was down there just wilding out, going hard against these people, trying to do what we do, or what we should do as Americans or as people who care, he knew it was getting pretty chaotic. So he hauled ass from Mo Valley, got a speeding ticket, went all the way down and pulled me out. And that individual is significant because that's who I was on the phone with on the day in question when these lying pieces of shit, that lying piece of shit from Napa Empowered Women's Services, Michelle, the one who ripped me and my wife off for like $500, her and her husband. From what I gathered, they came to court on an ex parte and tried to utilize this. All the abuse and torture and hardship and the veteran, the military exposure, the deployment, tried to use that and try to turn that into a threat, which is bullshit. It gets more complicated than that. But to try to manipulate the words and try to slant it, to try to get an end result that would have been favorable for the respondent, because she kept trying to take my son into Mexico, into these places where I'm telling folks, I got enemies there. It's a life and death conflict. It's not no fucking like, oh, words can be had or nothing. Nah, it's life and death. And this individual was kept trying to take my son down into the frontera when she's closely affiliated with the very people who committed these acts of violence, kidnapping and murder. And so there's a link, there's a path. And I was like, nah, enough is enough, man. These people are reckless. Her brother getting in a coma. All these crazy fucking people in Mexico that I don't get along with. Nah. And I had to go to great lengths to protect my child. And in the end, those sacrifices, which I should have never had to fucking make, are the only thing that resonated with the court to stop her. But when I came to them about the alcoholism and the drinking and everything, the protections that I asked to be put in place were negated. No sober link, no minors counsel for my son to have a voice, despite the fact that I keep going into court and I see all these other people that have minors counsel, which kind of baffles me. But they did find in my favor, or should I say in my son's favor, to not allow my wife to keep taking our son down into Mexico, into the frontera. But that's why these people tried to show up for this ex parte hearing, and their willingness to put my son in harm's way, and their willingness to get involved in this or to go lie and tell shady ass shit. But I was on the phone with Omar that day, and I made it really clear that my willingness to hold the court, and I did say I will hold the court accountable if people put my son in harm's way. I had already been laying the platform for that through proper means, through non-violent means. I go to the state bar, I file appeal. I don't have an attorney, so I go to regulatory agencies, to the county supervisor, congressman, senator, non-violent. But they tried to turn that into a violent. And if you use these avenues, they try to make that as like, oh, he's just doing this to do this. Like, what? These are non-violent things that are there, put forward as a protection measure for us to be able to use when we have nothing else. I don't have an attorney, I don't have that. So these are the only things that I had, and what I had to do to protect my son, it shouldn't have happened. And I expect recourse, and I expect accountability, and I'm gonna press forward with that. But these people from Napa Empower Women's Services I'm a kid that was hurt here in Napa. I grew up, I went through all this stuff, and I'm capable of so much, man. I won't sit here and tell people I'm not capable of violence. I've discharged violence. I'm honest about that. But I'm here to do what's in the best interest of my son, and he needs me to not do that. And so I get it. But yet these people are all hugged up with murderers and gangsters and all that stuff. But they put on this front when they go into the court and they're in front of all these people. So I'm here to pull your guys' covers back and let people see who you really are. And the fact that you guys are willing to lie, it's time to bring the truth forward about all of y'all. And that's what they're all angry about. They're saying somehow me being honest is imposing on their empowerment. That's a bunch of bullshit. And it's like, hey, the alcoholism, all the other crazy shit, that's the truth. So to try to come forward with the lie when people put you guys in positions where you have to be trusted and people depend on your integrity, that's an additional betrayal to the people of Napa and the people that come to you for help. I'm a kid here from Napa that was horribly abused. The people that should have protected me, they didn't. I went through all this chaotic shit. I'm capable of all kinds of horrible fucking shit, but I'm not doing that, man. That's not what's best for my son. I'm here by peaceful means. I'm here with you guys on YouTube. This is catharsis. I'm here. This is non-violent. But yet they still wanted to try to seek to use that against me, to try to use the hurt and the pain that I've suffered as a weapon against me, just so they can get their way under the false flag of empowerment. And if your empowerment means my son has to spend one day in jail or one day as a drug addict, then fuck your empowerment. Your empowerment don't mean shit, because it's not really empowerment. That's taking power from somebody else. And until people realize that and treat it as such, and we stop letting these people put up these false flags and these fake shields, and they don't want you to pull the shield down and be like, no, man, you can do better. We can do better. Come on. Then it's going to be that same sick, vicious cycle where young men go and suffer in prison. They're not there with their children, and that's ripping the culture apart. That tearing of the men from the family, and then just the chaos. So these so-called empowered women have a responsibility to their sons and their daughters, no different than these men do, to stop giving themselves permission to make these choices. Oh, I got to do this because of this. No, just ride through that shit. Even if it's hard, think about what's important, not just for your children, but for your grandkids, and so on and so on. Think linear, like your bloodline, linear all the way down. Ride with me, the permission statement. Thank you for being here.